premise of this series is that you can believe pretty much whatever you want to believe and behave in almost any way you want to behave and still call yourself a Christian because the word Christian is not defined in the Bible. In fact, we learned in the first week that Christian was a term that outsiders used to describe those inside the Jesus movement. It was a derogatory term that later was adopted by those insiders who called themselves something else. Do you remember what they called themselves? Disciples, that's right. You guys are catching on. This is a quick thing, right? They didn't call themselves Christians. That was a derogatory term outsiders used to call people inside the movement. Kind of like the word Hoosier, right? Depending on what you read about it, Hoosier was a derogatory term that these people, these good people of Indiana, you people, adopted as your name. So that's what has happened. But because the word Christian was not defined by Jesus or the early church, it ended up being defined by various Christian followers. And they began to define it by a series of beliefs. So Christian, over time, has become something a person believes. And if you have the right beliefs, then you're in the right in terms of being a Christian. At least that's what some churches teach. But that's not what Jesus taught. He said, you're a disciple, not a Christian. That was his word. And a disciple was all about the way a person behaves. Because you can say you believe something, but it's the behavior that we see. Jesus put it this way. He says, by this, everyone will know that you are my disciples if you love one another. Behavior. They will know you're my disciples if you behave in a certain way towards one another. And it wasn't just any definition of love. He said, love one another as I have loved you. So you must love one another. In other words, it is the Jesus kind of love. When we behave in that sort of way towards each other, that is what shows that we're disciples. That's the emphasis. John, we learned last week, 55 years later, John, who wrote the Gospel of John, who was there when Jesus was teaching this on his last night, 55 years later, after the siege of Jerusalem, after many of his friends had been murdered, after this just huge event, is still talking about love. And he says this is love. Not that we love God, but that he loved us. So the first idea here is that it's not our love towards God that is the measurement of what it means to love. Because our love towards God, let's just be honest, is sometimes inconsistent. It's incomplete. So if we look to our own love for God as the example of what it means to love and love others, then we're going to be missing something. So John says, it is not that. It's not that we love God, but that he loved us. And here's how he loved us. He sent his son, right? His child, that which was precious to him, that which was most important to him. He took what was so important to him, he sent his son as an atoning sacrifice for our sins. Now, you all know what a sacrifice is, right? It's when you prioritize, something else, and you let go of something that was important to you. When you sacrifice, like if you're a parent in the middle of the night and you sacrifice your sleep to take care of your crying baby, right? We know what sacrifice is, but this word atoning or atonement, this is a big word in the Bible, and there's a lot to it, but I'm just going to give a real simple definition. Just touch on this real briefly. Some have described atonement as meaning at one. That God sent his son as an atoning sacrifice for our sins, that he sacrificed so that we could be at one with him. That he was willing to give up anything, sacrifice anything, so that God and you can be at one, so that you can be in relationship with each other. This is incredibly, incredibly important to being able to love like Jesus compels us to love. Because it is being connected with God, knowing that you are absolutely loved by God, just as you are. I hope some of you this past week took that application from last week and started off your day, just as I am. God loves you completely. That's the starting point. God wants you to be filled up with love, to be at one with him. People who are filled up with God's love are able to pour out God's love. Absolutely critical. John put it this way. We love because he first loved us. Again, we love. Our capacity to love is because we were first loved. We can pour out love into the lives of other people because we have been filled up with God's love. That statement, just as I am, God loves me completely. Your sense of being loved by God, it is so important. You might think that it's kind of, just doing something for yourself by saying that in the morning, just as I am, God loves me. You might think you're being selfish or just self-focused, but John is trying to teach us that you need to be filled up with that love. You really need to embrace that. Let go of the barriers and say, I'm not lovable. God loved you not because of who you are, but because of who God is. That is our starting point. And why does God want us to be so filled up with love? Because he gave us the Great Commission. Jesus says right before he's leaving, he gives them the Great Commission. Go and make disciples of all nations. In other words, I want you to be so filled up with love that you can go out and pour out love so other people can be filled up with love and they can be pouring out love as well. This is positive feedback. So just as I am, God loves me completely. Each day, starting the day out with that, letting God's love flow in, allows you to receive the Great Commission. Go and make disciples, people who know how to love like Jesus loved. This is captured in Matthew 28. Here's the full Great Commission. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I've commanded you. I want to key in on this little word up at the top, make. Okay? Now, make, which is this word in Greek, which I can't pronounce and I wouldn't even try. Okay? So you can all see that. But the word used, translated as make, from the Greek word means to cause one to become a follower. To cause one to become a follower. We are to love others in such a way that it causes other people or compels other people to become followers. There's something about the way they love each other. There's something about the way that person loves me. I'm sometimes rude to them. They still love me. I sometimes don't show up, and they still love me. I sometimes act out of turn, or my behavior is just bad, but they still love me. And there's something about their love that just causes me to want to know more. What is your secret? What is the source? Cause them. Go out, connect with people, and act in such a way, behave in such a way towards them. And it has nothing to do with who they are and what they've done, but it has everything to do because God has poured into and caused them to become disciples. Now, the church actually did this really well. For like 300 years, the church was causing or compelling other people to become disciples, and the church grew and grew and grew, despite great persecution by the most powerful government of the day and age. I mean, Rome persecuted the early Christians, and despite that, they continued to cause other people to want to know more, to peer into their communities, and the church grew. So much so that by the 3rd century, the Roman emperor himself became a Christian. And at that point in time, things changed dramatically because at one point in time, the church was powerless and they were being persecuted by the Roman government. And then all of a sudden, they became very powerful and they had the backing of the Roman government, and that changed the dynamic. And instead of compelling people to want to become followers of Christ because of the way they loved them, they began to force it upon them. The Great Commission turned into something like this. Therefore, go and impose my teachings, values, and worldview on all nations, threatening them, and they can threaten now because they have the power, threaten them with judgment and destruction if they don't obey everything I've commanded you. Now, some of you have struggled with Christianity because you've experienced a church that's been like this. That they had some degree of power and they threatened you with some sort of judgment. And if you don't believe exactly as we believe, then there's going to be eternal judgment and destruction for you. I mean, scary stuff. This is the fire and brimstone preaching, you know? And this is why some people that you know don't want to have anything to do with church. This is why sometimes, and I hear this a lot, I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious, because religious people, they do this. This is out there. And when people experience this, we lose. Christianity loses. Jesus loses. In fact, here's a principle. Anytime we leverage anything other than love, we lose. we as a church, we as followers of Christ, we as individuals trying to love our spouses, our children, our neighbors. Anytime we leverage anything other than love, we lose. I mean, how many of you got married because you threatened the other person with the eternal damnation? Marry me, or, Hannah's not here, so I'll, right? Marry me, or you're going to burn in hell forever, right? Like, that's not how it works. It is by loving each other. So this is the background. I reviewed this because I wanted to lay the groundwork. That essentially, this is about love. We are known as Jesus' disciples by how we love one another. And the way that we're able to love one another like Jesus loved us is when we receive God's love. This is good news. This is the good news today, that you are so loved if you allow God to pour into you, that you have love to pour out. This is the good news today, and it's the good news every day, because this is the eternal truth. And we need that solid foundation, because today, I got to get up here for it. We're going to talk about something that's quite scary. Judgment. I'm glad you laughed. Right? Because we've got to have some humor if we're going to approach this topic, because this is, what's up our defenses. I mean, judgment, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to look at trouble in the Corinthian church, 1 Corinthians 5. And we're going to look at this dynamic of love. And it is a dynamic of love that has to do with judgment. And so we're going to look at something that happened and see what we can learn from the Apostle Paul. So here we go. I also received a report of a scandalous sex. That's right, we're talking about sex today. I also received a report of scandalous sex within your church family, a kind that wouldn't be tolerated even outside the church. Now, a couple things to note. Corinth was like Las Vegas in the ancient world, right? Right? And think about the kind of things that happen in Vegas, especially around the issue of sex. And so here we have a group of outsiders in basically Vegas, and the church has a scandalous sex scandal going on that even those outside the church are going, oh my gosh, who would do that? Like, that is so wrong. Like, we allow a lot of things in Corinth, but not that. You're all wondering what it is now, aren't you? One of your men is sleeping with his stepmother, his father's wife. One of your guys is sleeping with his stepmother. He's sleeping with his father's wife. And you're so above it all, it doesn't even faze you. Now, so above it all. I put a lot of thought into that. I was just thinking, what does it mean to be so above it all? To have this destructive relationship happening, right? You can think about how if somebody's sleeping with his father's wife, how that would hurt Thanksgiving dinner, right? It'd be really, really awkward. I mean, think about how ruinous that could be to a family. It's that relationship. And you, the church, is so above it all. And I'm not exactly sure what that means. Maybe it is, that we are, focused on more important things, or maybe it is that we are so accepting of people that, we're above it all, that we're okay with just anything. But it's like, you're so above it all. Shouldn't this break your hearts? Paul says. Shouldn't it bring you to your knees in tears? Shouldn't this person and his conduct be confronted and dealt with? To which some of us are thinking, confrontation? Pointing out somebody's conduct? I mean, I was okay with this love thing. I thought we were talking about love, Paul. Pointing out their conduct? Confronting them? Dealing with it? I want you to think about, if you're a parent or we're a child, okay? You're a parent or we're a child. Pretty much everybody, right? Okay, all right. Think about how at some point in time, there had to be a judgment or a distinction, an accountability for that relationship to go well. I mean, it's fun being a parent when everything is going well and you can let your kids play and run loose, but occasionally you got to implement bedtime. Occasionally, you got to implement a curfew. Occasionally, you got to make them eat their vegetables. Occasionally, you got to teach the children the difference between good behavior and bad behavior. Because bad behavior will lead to bad outcomes. You can literally destroy your life. Some of us know that way better than others. We've brought ourselves pretty low with some bad decisions. And it would have been very helpful if there was somebody there to help direct us onto a better path. That's what Paul is talking about here. As it becomes more evident as we go along. It says, should this person in his conduct be confronted and dealt with? I'm telling you what I would do. Of course you are, Paul, because Paul's always telling everybody what he would do. I'm telling you what I would do. I'm telling you that this is wrong. In a different translation, he says, I've already passed judgment. So the first thing I would do is be very clear that sleeping with your father's wife or certain behaviors are destructive both to the person and to the community. I've already passed judgment. I'll be very clear. It says, you must not simply look the other way and hope it goes away on its own, which is what a lot of us prefer to do because it's easier. It's more comfortable. I was telling our Bible study about a situation last year in my work environment. We were in an environment where there was an agreement that we would give each other feedback and hold each other accountable to certain goals and standards of behavior. So we're trying to grow with one another, and one of my colleagues was violating her own goals for herself. And so I was coached up by my supervisor to confront her about that, to give her feedback. And you know how I felt before I sat down to give her feedback? Nervous and scared. Because I would have rather it went away on its own. But instead, Paul says, bring it out in the open and deal with it. Many of these things don't just go away. Instead, they compound and they get worse as they're not addressed. And those hurts and those wounds fester. He says, bring it out in the open and deal with it. And for those of us who like to bring things out in the open, okay, right, who like to deal with things where you're like, hey, finally a sermon that's for me, there's one little thing that Paul puts on here that we got to keep in mind. Bring it out in the open and deal with it in the authority of Jesus, our master. You know who has a master? Disciples. Right? Disciples have a master, and he says, deal with it in the authority of Jesus, our master. Deal with it as disciples of Jesus would, as those who are defined by the way they love one another. Yes, there's times where to love somebody, we got to bring things out in the open, especially when they're part of our community. But we got to do so from the proper place with the authority of Jesus, our master, as disciples, as those who are willing to go to any length to meet people where they are, to love them, to be for them. That is the thing. Paul says, assemble the community, hold this man's conduct up to public scrutiny, which makes me think about the teaching of Jesus who says that if you have an issue with somebody, first talk to them one-on-one. And then if that doesn't work out, you bring another person and you talk to them again in private, now two-on-one. And then if that doesn't work out, then you assemble the community. So I'm assuming that Paul has already maybe done some of this or some of this has happened. I don't know, but I'm just reading that into the text. But at a certain point, you assemble the community. Now that doesn't mean putting it on Facebook or blasting an email to the entire church. We're talking about this intimate community, and one of the things that allows us to know that is that these early churches, they were more like community groups. They were a little bit smaller. They met in each other's homes. I think he's talking about that community, where there's already relationships and intentionality. So assemble the community and hold this man's conduct up to public scrutiny within that community, that intimate community. And let him defend it if he can. Like, give him a chance. You know, we've judged it, but hey, maybe there's something we're missing. But if he can't, then out with him. In another translation, it sounds even worse. Hand this man over to Satan for the destruction of the flesh. Now, the word hand this man over is like a legal term. It's like put him in custody. Like Satan is, his new parole officer. Could you imagine that? Meet your parole officer. Satan, right? That's what we're talking about here. hand this man over to Satan for the destruction of the flesh, which is a Bible term for the things in us that are sinful. Why would you do that? It says, so that his spirit may be saved. We're not doing it to get back at him. We're not handing him over to Satan or putting him out of the community or bringing this to public scrutiny so that we can hurt him like he hurt us or make a fool out of him. This is all driven from love. So that the spirit may be saved. And you probably know, like I know, that sometimes the fastest way out of destructive sin is to go all the way in. Go all the way to the bottom. Bottom out. And then when you bottom out and you've lost any sense of, like, I can handle this, I'm going to be okay, even though everybody's telling me it's not okay, then when you bottom out, you're ready to come back to a community like this, full of bottomed out sinners who know they need God's grace. So that's the point of this. We're not holding it up to hurt him or to, any of that sort of thing. It's to help save him. Sometimes we need that. But we think, that's pretty tough. And is it really loving? Because, wouldn't that hurt this person's feelings? Paul says, yeah. It'll be totally devastating to him. And of course, and embarrassing to you. This is where all this kind of touchy-feely love stuff is very, very real. You really want to love somebody? It's like, yeah, I like the idea of loving other people. Really? Because sometimes, if you love somebody, it's going to get difficult. Sometimes you have to have that tough conversation. Sometimes you have to let yourself be embarrassed. It'll be devastating to him. And of course it will. And embarrassing to you. But better devastation and embarrassment than damnation. Think about people who, if somebody would have intervened and loved them, said, hey, I just got to step beside you and walk with you until you change your path, because this can lead to absolute destruction. That happens. We know it. We have family members and friends who are in a pit of destruction. And their life is really, really hard. And God can give them a new beginning, but they can't go back and have what they once had. This stuff is real. Paul goes on. Your flip and callous arrogance in these things bothers me, which I'm kind of like, okay, Paul, I'm getting the point. But Paul, he just keeps hammering me. He says, you pass it off as a small thing, but it's anything but that. Yes, yeast too is a small thing, but it works its way through the whole batch of dough pretty fast. Paul's saying, often we think of these things as small things because they start off as small things. But yeast can work its way through dough pretty fast. A toxic behavior can begin to take over a life pretty fast. A toxic behavior can begin to take over a group pretty fast. A culture pretty fast. You got to respect this for what it is. Paul transitions a little bit. Because now he's got us bought in, right? We're going, okay, things can get really bad really quick. And so anytime we see this destructive behavior, as much as we don't want to, as much as we'd like for it to just go away on its own, we're going to confront it, okay? And so all of a sudden now we got lots of confrontation in front of us because there's a lot of bad behavior out in the world. And Paul begins to clarify it. He says, I wrote you in my earlier letter, which is a letter that scholars believe has been lost. They originally think that 4 letters were written to the church of Corinth. We have 2 in the Bible. And Paul references this other letter. And he's going to begin to clarify something. He said, I wrote you in my earlier letter that you should make yourselves at home among the sexually promiscuous. I didn't mean that you should have nothing at all to do with outsiders of that sort. Okay? Here's our word again, outsiders, all right? It didn't mean that you should have nothing to do with outsiders of that sort, or with crooks, whether blue collar or white collar, or with spiritual phonies for that matter. Okay, so let me clarify something about all this. There's all these kind of people out there, and I'm telling you to stay away from them, but there's a little bit, something I wrote in my last letter I need to clear up. I didn't mean that, everybody, all the outsiders, you're just supposed to stay away from them. And there's religious communities that do that, right? He says, you shouldn't do that because you'd have to leave the world entirely to do that. You're going to stay away from everybody that has some issues, that is engaged in bad behavior. You would have to just stay in your room all day because there's so much of that out there. So he's not talking about everybody. He says, but I'm saying that you shouldn't act as if everything is fine when a friend who claims to be Christian or a disciple in our term, and this is key, a friend claims. Let me just pause there for a minute. So what Paul is getting to here is he's saying, look, those who have said, I want to be in the community, those who've said, I want to be a disciple, those who have said, hey, let's walk this journey together. Let's start to make progress together. Hey, look, 2 is better than 1. We can do this better together if we meet and we start talking about the things that we want to do. That friend who's saying, I'm going for it, that's the one who we're giving feedback to. It's not your neighbor who's never set foot inside your church, has nothing to do with Christianity, wants nothing to do with it. He's talking about those people who have decided, hey, I'm on this path. I want to go in this direction. I want to journey with you. I give you permission because you're my friend to speak into my life. That is the distinction. They've invited you, whether either explicitly, I give you permission to speak into my life, or because of the proximity and the closeness of that friendship and the things they've stated. That's who we're holding accountable. That's who we're offering this kind of love. It's very different. A friend who claims to be a Christian who is promiscuous or crooked, is flippant, God gives us a laundry list, rude to friends, gets drunk, becomes greedy or predatory. You can't just go along with this, treating it as acceptable behavior. To clarify even more, Paul said, I'm not responsible for what outsiders do. Who am I to judge them? They didn't sign up for this. They didn't ask to be part of this. They're not saying, I want to be a disciple. Who am I to judge them? And that's quite honestly the people we like to judge because it's an easy target. But who am I? I'm not responsible to judge outsiders and what they do. But don't we have a responsibility for those within our community of believers? When you're a community of love, we have a responsibility to each other. And when we've been invited, in a certain sense, to help each other walk in the way that leads to life, then sometimes we have to have the uncomfortable conversations. That is the distinction. Now, I'm going to give you a summary statement that I heard somewhere else, and it made me laugh, and hopefully you'll find it somewhat humorous, but it stuck with me the moment that I heard it, and it helped clarify this dynamic of outsiders and insiders and kind of who we're to judge, or maybe use a better word that's easier for you, help hold accountable or walk with, whatever you want to put in there. And as anybody grew up in a church, I wish Chewy was here for this. Anybody grew up in a church where you said amen after the preacher said something? Amen, right? Okay. And you all know about those kind of churches, right? Right, everybody out there, you've heard of that. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you this phrase that hopefully will stick in your head and be helpful. And after I give it to you, I want you to just respond with like a loud amen. Even if you don't want to do this, okay? Go on. All right? This will be fun. All right, ready? Ready for this? Okay. So what Paul is saying is, judge the believing and not the heathen. Amen. Right? Judge the believing and not the heathen. Those who said, I want to walk this path. And will you help me? Because it's difficult. It's easy to get off course. That's who we're supposed to direct our attention to. Direct it to ourselves. Jesus once taught, hey, remove the plank from your eye. Don't focus on the speck in your neighbor's eye. And Christianity has become so unappealing to people because we do quite the opposite. We focus on the behavior of those outside the community and outside our sphere of influence, and we don't hold ourselves accountable. When we flip that dynamic, when we get this right, when we focus on growing, what can I do to grow? How can I be more loving? How can I help my fellow disciples grow because they've asked me to help them grow? When we get this right, our lives serve as a continual invitation to follow Jesus. This is the dynamic that causes people to want to follow Christ. This is the dynamic that compels people to peer into our communities because we are not judging them at all, not looking at their behavior, not saying, hey, how could you, or whatever. Instead, we're going to say, hey, we're just trying to grow in our capacity to love. And I've invited these people to help me because I know it's hard to get it always right. That kind of community. And when you have other people helping you, you grow more. We need each other. This is why community groups and other intentional relationships and mentorships and all these sorts of things matter so much. And if you read the New Testament, if you read the Bible, everyone who's really made an impact for the gospel, who's really shown God's love in this world, they've had mentors, they've had a community around them, and they are growing. And they are compelling others to come take part. So this week, would you allow yourselves to be held accountable? Being like Jesus in order to become like Jesus. Allow yourself, right? This is your decision to be held accountable. And this might be with a trusted friend. This might be with a group of people. It might just start in your prayer life. Because when you put it on the table, and you say, God, I'm really trying to grow and become like Jesus, and here's what's going on, then God can respond with his grace. Then it can begin. So you might say this. It's kind of the same as last week, but a little bit different. You might say, just as I am, God's grace is sufficient for me. I'm going to put it all on the table. I'm going to allow my behavior and the way that I love to be on the table, to be scrutinized, not because of for any fear, but because I'm trying to grow, because I understand that's a dynamic. But just as I am, God's grace is sufficient for me. He can handle it, and he's going to respond with grace because that is the way our loving Father in heaven wants to treat you. Let me pray for you before our closing. Gracious Lord, we have heard the message that you have called us to love others, and we believe deep in our hearts that somewhere you have loved us completely, that your grace is sufficient for us. And so, Lord, I ask that each of us here today might be able to take this message and just open ourselves up even more so that you can touch all aspects of our lives, so that we might journey together, that we might come together and help each other walk on the way that leads to life. So let us each know that just as we are today, your grace is sufficient for all our needs.